sometimes I wonder if Republicans hate poor people. Other times I'm sure they do, and I wonder why they hate poor people. That's certainly not in the Judeo-Christian tradition, but it certainly seems to be the case. And our next guest is an expert in poverty and poverty issues, and I think one of the things she will tell us is that we are not distinct from poor people in this country because Americans move in and out of poverty a great deal. But we'll get into that in a second. Rebecca Vallas is also, among other things, the host of a podcast entitled Off-Kilter, and the 0 Hour and Off-Kilter once did a joint broadcast called the Off Hour. She is the vice president of the Poverty to Prosperity program at the Center for American Progress. And she joins us now. Rebecca, great to talk to you again.
Always great to talk to you, RJ. And I love that you revived the Off Hour because I think of that every time I hear your show.
Yeah, we should definitely do that again sometime. It was so much fun. I mean, you made me look a little bad by being so much better at it than me, but, you know, I can forget that.
It's funny you remember it that way because I thought we were just such a great combo.
No, we were, absolutely. But, you know, you and I were talking a little bit before the program about the latest measure coming out of the Republicans in Congress, and that's what got me off on my introductory rant about the Republicans and their feelings about poor people or people who need assistance. And tell us a little bit about the Farm Bill.
You know, I have to say, RJ, it feels like it's almost every single day that there's one more piece of news that breaks about yet another program or policy that helps struggling folks make ends meet that Speaker Paul Ryan and President Trump and other leaders in Washington, particularly Republican leaders, want to dismantle. I mean, maybe it shouldn't be surprising to us anymore after watching them spend all of 2017 trying to dismantle the entire healthcare system and end Medicaid as we know it, but they've pretty much shown us they're not done trying to take away health care from tens of millions of Americans. Instead, they'd rather double down on those efforts by adding in food assistance and even affordable housing into the mix in terms of what they want to slash. And of course, your listeners will be more aware than probably anyone of what it's all about, really. It's all about paying for the huge hole they just blew in the deficit, $1.5 trillion worth of a hole in the deficit, by giving massive tax giveaways to their donor class, to the wealthiest people in this country, and to super, ultra wealthy corporations in the form of massive tax cuts that were signed into law at the end of last year. So now they're turning around and they're saying, my God, we just don't have enough money to pay for Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And now they're telling us that they don't feel that we have enough money to pay for food stamps, nutrition assistance that is absolutely critical for millions and millions of families in this country, and in particular when wages aren't enough to feed folks' families. So we heard news come out of Congress just this week telling us that they now have a little bit more in the way of a plan when it comes to how they want to take food out of the mouths of struggling workers and families, and they've started to show us what they want to do. We can get into some of those details, RJ, but it's truly a nightmare that so many struggling folks are living every day watching news break about the programs that help them make ends meet, like food stamps.
You know, one of the things that I think that Republicans do, Rebecca, is they like to paint this picture of people who receive these forms of help as other people other than you, whoever the you is, and I think in a lot of cases we know who it is, but they like to otherize people who need assistance, even though a lot, as you've said, and others have pointed out, most Americans, I don't remember the exact statistic, will experience at least 1 year of poverty in their lives. So it's really us. It's really not other people. And they also present this picture of people who get some help as somehow like living the easy life of just, you know, kicking back and, you know, letting the those sweet federal dollars roll in, when if you look at the statistics of who gets, you mentioned housing assistance, the level of poverty you have to get into, the people, many of whom are working in poverty, many of whom are raising children in poverty, the notion, they create this illusion. It feels like a lot of these ideas, like linking food stamps to job training, it feels as if a lot of them, really they're meant to deliver a message that some people are getting something for free and you're not.
That's exactly right, RJ. You really hit the nail on the head. I think some recent polling that the Center for American Progress did that actually shines a light on what we're watching happen is, I think, really illustrative here. We did some polling to look at some of the proposals coming out of Republican leaders like Speaker Paul Ryan, like President Trump, to cut Medicaid, to cut food stamps, to cut housing, with the same policies that we're talking about right now. And we asked folks, what do you think about this? And we found that it's not just Social Security and Medicare that are the third rail of American politics anymore when it comes to how popular those programs are. People often call them the third rail because you don't want to go near them, right? Because you know you'll pay the political price at the ballot box if your constituents understand that you're trying to cut those programs. Well, we found 80% of Americans oppose cuts to Medicaid. 78% of Americans oppose cuts to Social Security disability benefits. 73% of Americans oppose cuts to affordable housing. That similar numbers when it comes to nutrition assistance like food stamps. So I think the key takeaways here are that these programs are hugely popular. We actually saw that really play out in the course of the healthcare fight last year. I think a lot of Republicans were surprised to find that Medicaid was so popular. In many ways, it was actually what saved the Affordable Care Act and had people rioting in the streets when proposed cuts were being debated in Washington. And so I think that's actually why we're watching Speaker Paul Ryan and other Republican leaders in Washington do what we're watching them do right now, which is to try to rebrand their same old agenda of Robin Hood in reverse, taking away food and healthcare and housing from people who need it, all to give to the already richest folks in this country in the form of these tax cuts that they've already passed into law and want to do way more of, as we keep hearing in the news week to week. They've realized that that's not a popular agenda, and they're actually in many ways very afraid of the pummeling that they might take in November if they are viewed by the American public as the party that wants to enact Robin Hood in reverse policies like these. And that is why we're now watching Paul Ryan and other Republicans in Washington start to try to put a new shade of lipstick on this same unpopular pig. And so, RJ, you mentioned that one of the pieces of the news that broke today about how they want to cut nutrition assistance like food stamps is that they're saying they want to connect it to job training. Well, they are trying everything they can think of to try to rebrand these cuts as being somehow good for struggling workers or compassionate. Well, it's total hogwash, and people need to not fall for it. Taking food away from struggling workers isn't going to help them find work any faster, no matter how many times President Trump and Speaker Ryan say that the best way out of poverty is a job. If they were serious about helping the forgotten man and forgotten woman that Trump campaigned on helping not that long ago, they would embrace policies like raising the poverty level minimum wage so that earnings are enough for workers to feed their families. But that's not what we're seeing them doing. We're seeing them hell-bent on taking away everything that helps families afford the basics, all to pay for those tax cuts that they rammed through last year for the wealthy.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just, personally, I don't think it's just about, I think you're absolutely right about the Robin Hood in reverse thinking and their sense that, that we have to pay for deficit spending somehow. But I also think there's something deeper going on, Rebecca Vallas. I think that they hate government. They hate the fact that government does good things for people. They want to dismantle government. And so, in a way, they're using oh, well, now we don't have the money to do what they wanted to do all along, which is dismantle these programs that help people. But I think you're exactly right that they're trying to sell their programs, which are now, and I'm delighted to hear those statistics, the survey statistics. Their programs are so unpopular, they're trying to package them in a different way. So, for example, job training. Here's a crazy idea. If you think the way out of poverty is for someone to have a job, instead of making them sit around for 8 hours taking a word processing class, make sure there are jobs at living wages available for those people. Give them a job. So how about that? So yeah, it's a way to take people, to deprive them of assistance and make it look like that's not really what you're doing. You're just encouraging them. And then if they won't take the encouragement, then we'll deprive them of the assistance. Well, there could be a million good reasons why people can't take the job training, and maybe their kid is sick. Maybe it's not offered near them. We saw that with the welfare program, so-called welfare reform of the 1990s, where the jobs just weren't there for people, but they lost the assistance anyway. So it also ties to me with the fact that the Trump administration has now okayed, I believe at last count it was 5 states, to make eligibility for Medicaid conditional on, again, I think there was a job tie to that, well, they had to be looking for jobs or they had to have worked within a certain period of time. You probably know the details better than I do.
No, you're exactly right, RJ. This is part and parcel of the same agenda, which is both about dismantling effective programs like Medicaid, like nutrition assistance through food stamps, like affordable housing programs. But it's also about divide and conquer. And that's why I think you really hit the nail on the head when you talked earlier about what's really motivating these policies. It's very much about trying to paint a picture of us and them, and that the people who need that kick in the butt, Republicans are telling us, just to that extra nudge so that they go out and work. It's like they're trying to paint this Fox News picture of people sitting on the couch eating bonbons, that's what poverty in America looks like. Well, we know that's not the case. Overwhelmingly, folks who are struggling to make ends meet in this country are doing so because their wages aren't enough for them to afford to keep a roof over their family's head and put food on the table. And a big part of that is how much the minimum wage has declined in what it can buy and what it can afford for families in this country. CAP actually did some analysis a couple of weeks ago, finding that a minimum wage worker in 2018 had to work an extra 2 whole months just to earn the same amount in a single year as she did the last time that Congress raised the federal minimum wage, which was almost a decade ago. So that pay cut that a minimum wage worker is effectively taking in 2018 is a whopping $2,370. That is nearly 47 times the tax cut that this same worker can expect to see under the tax law that Speaker Ryan keeps telling workers they should be so grateful for, whether it's going to help them afford their Costco membership or whatever he thinks it can buy. That is the reality facing struggling families today. And these so-called work requirements that President Trump and Speaker Ryan are telling us is somehow a form of compassion, they're the opposite of what would actually help workers get ahead. You mentioned the failed experiment with so-called work requirements in the mid-1990s that is now today remembered as quote-unquote welfare reform. Well, you know what? We know from decades of research following that failed experiment what happens when you tell people, nope, sorry, we're going to rip away basic assistance from you if you can't find work or get enough hours in your job. Well, guess what happens? Study after study tells us that what actually helps people is making sure they have access to the basics. if you have enough food, if you have access to health care, if you can put a roof over your head and keep it there, those are the things that help people be able to work and thrive at work and have higher earnings so that, guess what, they end up not needing to turn to programs like Medicaid and food stamps to be able to support their families. So again, this is really about a bait and switch of trying to convince the American people that cutting these effective programs that we all know are there for us in our times of need, if we end up needing to turn to them because we lose a job or because we're not earning enough in our job or we get sick or a family member gets sick, they're trying to hide what they're really doing because they know it's the opposite of what the American people want.
And I'll bet a lot of the people within the sound of our voice, even people who think at first blush that it sounds good to them, have an aunt on Social Security disability or a cousin getting food stamp assistance. So, closing thought on this, the fact is 1 in 5 children in the United States still lives in poverty. And so you're punishing them too. Unfortunately, Rebecca Vallas, we're going to have to leave it there. But once again, Rebecca is the Vice President of the Poverty to Prosperity Program. Say that 3 times fast. At the Center for American Progress. She is our good friend. And as always, great to talk to you, Rebecca.
RJ, you're the best. Thanks so much.
You bet.